Hello everyone. Today we want to talk to you a little bit about your team meetings, making sure that you're off to a good start and having effective meetings so that you can have the best project experience. A little bit about this presentation, we'll talk some key elements in all meetings, we'll talk about team roles, talk about some policies you might want to discuss as a group, how can you make decisions, and then some just general best practices. So some of the key elements of any effective meeting. First thing is make sure that everyone in the group understands the possible team roles. There's a list of these available in Chapter 9 of your engineering text, but we'll also cover them in a bit. You also need to have an agenda. This should be a written document. You can send it out over email if you'd like. That should go out prior to the meeting. It helps students make sure that, group members in your case, make sure that you've paid attention to what you're going to talk about and you're in the right mindset. Additionally, everyone should be prepared. I'm sure you've had the experience where you sat down to do some homework as a group, and one of the people said, hey, yeah, I haven't even looked at the homework yet. And then you spent a lot of time getting them ready before you could even do the first problem. Everyone needs to pay attention within a meeting. Put down your phones, close your laptops, just write on a piece of paper your notes. That's very important so that you can focus on what's being said. Because if a decision is made and you're not paying attention to it, congratulations, you still have to follow through with that decision.
And finally, you'll also need to summarize everything that happened in the meeting. As the person in the reporter role, which we'll talk about in just a few moments, you'll need to summarize all of the key points and be sure to email that summary out to all of the group members to serve as a record of what happened.
So some of the possible roles. These are also out of Section 9 of your engineering text. One of them is the leader facilitator. This is the individual that opens the meeting and closes the meeting and keeps the conversation going within the meeting. You also have the recorder and spokesperson. The recorder is the person that's going to take notes. Everyone in the meeting should take notes, but the recorder's notes are what are used to generate the final summary. And then the spokesperson role is often also part of the recorder role. They actually can report information out to external stakeholders or external parties that are interested. You have the optimist and pessimist. These can be individuals, or oftentimes they're just elements or roles that people take on throughout the meeting. The optimist is the person arguing for why you should do something or could do something, and the pessimist is arguing why you shouldn't or couldn't do something. The analyst role is also an important role, and again, anyone can take this on within a meeting, though sometimes it can be a discrete individual, and they actually spend a little bit of time kind of thinking about how the meeting went and how the conversations and policies worked, and so maybe can make suggestions how to change how meetings operate to be more effective. So specifically, though, in the leader facilitator role, they need to keep the meeting focused and on track. So you don't want to have a group of people kind of get stuck in a side conversation and take 30 minutes in only an hour-long meeting. Instead, they have to keep the process flowing and possibly table things. I want to point out they're a facilitator, not a leader. They don't sit at the front and say, you do this, you do this, you do this. Instead, they help the group work through the agenda. Okay. Additionally, they're responsible for closing the meeting, saying when it's done.
So the recorder will be sure to capture key points that happened during the meeting that were discussed during the meeting. It's important not to miss any of those key points because the record that will stand later on is what group members will go back to and refer to help them remember what had happened during the meeting and what was agreed upon during the meeting. If there's a key point that the recorder doesn't write down that was discussed, well, it's as if it doesn't exist. It's as if it wasn't discussed because the record is really what the group will be able to refer to in the future. The recorder will also highlight decisions and action items. And this refers to treating your record, your notes that you create and email out to your group as really a technical document that you're creating to be an internal record for your group. And so you can use things like bold-faced type and sections and try and organize your notes as best as possible so that later on they're easy to read and it's easy to find the key points that you're looking for. Another responsibility for the recorder is to collect future agenda items to make sure that it's clear what has been left for the future, and to guide the future meetings. That information will be very useful. So be sure to identify the agenda items that have been decided upon for the future. In that email that you create, you will need to highlight the decisions made, again, because if there's not a record of them, then it's as if they weren't made. You'll need to highlight the tasks assigned to each individual or group and the deadlines that have been agreed upon for those tasks. And then you'll also need to, again, highlight the decisions about what needs to be discussed in the next meeting or what's been left for the next meeting. And remember to email that out in a timely fashion, specifically within 24 hours. And that's also to ensure that group members can review that on their own and make sure everything checks out and identify anything they need to go back and discuss again if necessary. So finally, the analyst responsibilities. When discussing the analyst responsibilities, I want to be sure to mention that these are responsibilities that really all group members should take on as responsible members of the group, because as an analyst, or the responsibilities of analysis are really referring to this idea of metacognition. Metacognition means reflecting on the process as it happens and remaining constantly aware of what you are doing and what your other group members are doing and how that's affecting the effectiveness, the ultimate effectiveness of your group process. And so one person should be identified at least as the analyst to make sure that this is happening. Be sure to monitor the process that the team is using as the analyst and reflect on areas of strengths that you might be able to identify, and also any areas that you could focus on for improvement of that process on an ongoing basis.
And so I want to point out a little bit about this too. This doesn't just happen within a meeting itself. Using your metacognition to examine all the processes that your group's involved in is very important being successful. A great example I run into is I'll often get two members of a team coming into my office saying the third member doesn't communicate well. What they mean by communicate and well varies from group to group, but essentially what it boils down to is these two people think that they talk together a lot and they have a lot of good conversations and discussions, but the third party isn't involved. What we often find out by spending time with that is that these two individuals have a way they like to communicate, whether it be in person, over lunch maybe, or on the phone, or over email, or maybe they're even roommates. And the third person, that's not the way they communicate the best. So the problem here is that these two individuals could just get mad about the problem as they see it, or they could step back and they could think about, well, there's other ways we can communicate just as effectively. Maybe we can try those, and that'll work a little better for that third person. So use your metacognition at every time you're running into a problem, because it might not be the problem you think you have. Back onto meetings. A couple policies you probably want to talk about as a group to make sure that they're done and they're understood by everyone is attendance and lateness. How late is late? What happens if you don't show up? Other norms and expectations. So for example, how prepared should you be? Should you bring certain materials? Things of that nature. Participation and information sharing. So is everyone expected to talk? How much are they expected to talk? Is everyone expected to give a mini report of what they did? Things like that. How we deal with interruptions. So for example, a phone rings, or someone knocks on the door, or someone has to get up and leave, whatever it is. A lot of these are pretty simple, so it's not hard to come up with policies everyone agrees on, but you should spend the time to do that. Decision making, how do you make decisions? We'll touch on that in a second. And then quality of work. How good is good work? How crappy is crappy work? How okay is okay work? Again, easy to figure out, but you don't want to show up with what you think is good work and someone else thinks is crappy work. Making decisions. There's a lot of ways to make decisions. I highlighted a few that are identified in the text, chapter 9. There's decision by authority. This really only works if some person is in charge of everyone and they can just dictate what everyone's going to do. Arguably not even the best way of making decisions in the real world, and impossible in your groups because your groups are all the same level. You might appeal to your stakeholder to get some input on this, but still probably not the best fit. Your expert member. So let's say you have someone that says they're an expert in microcontrollers. Possibly they could make a decision related to microcontrollers for the group. If you choose to do that, I highly recommend that you have one of the other group members double check that it is the right idea. You wouldn't want to spend 6 weeks going down a path only to find out your expert wasn't as expert as they thought. So spend a little bit of time to double check. You might also use your stakeholder as an expert in this situation. Minority control is when you make a subgroup of people to make a decision. Majority is when you vote. And consensus is when you work and argue to make sure that everyone agrees on the same thing. I recommend consensus specifically for if you're making changes to policy, things that affect the whole group, especially interactions. But use the right decision-making method for the correct problem. Finally, a quick few best practices. Meet frequently. At least have a meeting, an official one with meeting minutes and all that once a week. Though I recommend you spend a lot of time together. Have lunch together, do homework together, things like that. The faster you can get through the bonding phase, you can move through the forming phase, through the storming phase to get to the norming phase, if you remember from our stages of groups. That's what you want to do. Respect each other. You might have different opinions, but none of you are dumb. You're all fourth-year students. You've been here. You've done a lot of work. So respect each other's decisions. And manage conflict. Don't leave anything alone. If you disagree on something, talk it out rather than let it fester. That is the number one thing that breaks groups apart, is there's a conflict. They don't talk about it. A few months go by, and they hate each other. So talk it out.
And then always remember to use your metacognition and be aware of what you're doing and how you're relating to your group and what the process that you're using is. That includes while you're creating policies for your group. Anything that relates to how your group is using a process to move along through the project, you're going to need to be sure to reflect on that and try to identify strengths in the process and possible areas for improvement.
So in summary, meetings need to be run well to avoid wasting everyone's time. If you have a bunch of meetings that are wasted time, people are going to be less and less involved and less willing to communicate. Every meeting needs to have a summary email for the record. So the reporter, individual needs to send that out to the group. And you need to have a meeting at least once a week. One other thing that we didn't really touch on, but I think is important to realize, is those roles that we had can move around. You shouldn't have the same reporter for every meeting, and you shouldn't have the same person necessarily writing your email to your stakeholder every meeting. Everyone should be involved in that, but different individuals can take on different roles. In fact, you're going to have an assignment about this where we're going to ask you to change roles later in the course.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Good luck.